Welcome back to Her Journey, where we share stories of women who refuse to be broken. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join our family of survivors because today's story will make your blood boil and your heart soar. This is about a 76-year-old woman named Felicia Andrews who thought she knew what betrayal looked like until her own family showed her a whole new level of cruelty. But honey, when they messed with the wrong grandmother, they learned that some women don't just survive, they conquer. So grab your tea, settle in, and let me tell you how one elderly woman turned the tables on everyone who underestimated her. My name is Felicia Andrews, and at 76 years old, I thought I'd weathered every storm life could throw at me. Lord, was I wrong. The rain was coming down like Judgment Day that Tuesday afternoon in October, hammering against my kitchen windows and drowning out everything except the sound of my own racing heart. I'd just put the kettle on for my afternoon Earl Grey, same ritual I'd followed for 40 years, when the doorbell rang. 3 sharp, insistent chimes that seemed to cut right through my bones. Something was wrong. I felt it the moment I opened that front door and saw her standing there on my wraparound porch. Maya. My daughter-in-law of exactly 1 week. 7 days since she'd floated down that church aisle in white silk and lace, promising to love and honor my son David until death parted them. 7 days since I'd foolishly believed the sweet girl who called me Mom Felicia and insisted on helping with the wedding dishes was actually the angel she pretended to be. But there she stood with that smile, the one I'd mistaken for warmth but now recognized as calculation. Behind her lurked a nervous man in a wrinkled suit, clutching a metal briefcase like his life depended on it. And towering over them both, my 6'2" son David, soaked to the bone and staring at his shoes like they held the secrets of the universe. "Hi there, Mom Felicia," Maya chirped, brushing past me before I could even process what was happening. "Hope you don't mind us dropping by. We just need to take care of some quick paperwork. I brought a notary to make everything official." The house. She was talking about my house. This Victorian beauty on Maple Street with its original hardwood floors and hand-carved crown molding. The house where I'd raised David alone after his father died in that terrible accident 30 years ago. The house that held every precious memory I had left. David's first steps across the living room, his midnight fevers when I'd rock him in the old chair, the homework sessions at the kitchen table, the Christmas mornings, the birthday parties, the laughter and tears that had soaked into these walls like love itself. "What paperwork?" I asked, though my voice sounded strange to my own ears. Maya was already setting up shop in my living room, spreading documents across my coffee table like she was dealing cards at a casino. The same table where David had built Lego castles, where we'd played countless games of Monopoly, where I'd helped him write his college application essays. "Oh, just some estate planning stuff," she said with that practiced casualness. "Power of attorney forms, property transfer documents. Nothing complicated. We figure it's better to get everything organized now, before things get difficult." I stared at the papers. Official-looking documents with my name typed at the top and blank signature lines waiting like hungry mouths. Power of attorney. Property transfer. The legal language blurred together, but the intent was crystal clear. They wanted me to sign away my rights to my own home. "I didn't ask for any estate planning," I said quietly. Maya's smile flickered for just a heartbeat. "Well, of course not, but David and I have been talking, and we really think it's time. You're 76 years old, Mom Felicia. This house is so big, so much maintenance. Wouldn't you be happier somewhere smaller? Somewhere with help available." Help available. Code words for a nursing home. For being put away like an old coat that's outlived its usefulness. I looked at David, my baby boy who I'd carried through pneumonia and broken bones and teenage heartbreak, who I'd worked double shifts to put through college, who used to tell me I was the strongest person he knew. He was still staring at those shoes. "David," I said, "is this what you want?" Finally, he looked up, and for a moment I saw the scared little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Mom, we just think. I mean, maybe it would be easier if you don't really need all this space anymore. The words hit me like physical blows. My own son, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, was standing in my living room suggesting I didn't deserve to live in my own home. And if I refuse? I asked. The room went silent except for the rain drumming against the windows. Maya and David exchanged a look, quick, but I caught it. They discussed this scenario. They had a plan for my refusal. Well, Maya said, her voice losing that sugary coating, we'd hate for things to get complicated. I mean, at your age, with your memory issues. Memory issues. I didn't have memory issues. I could recite every birthday, every anniversary, every important date in my family's history going back 3 generations. But I understood the threat, refused to cooperate, and suddenly I developed memory issues that would require legal intervention. I need some time to think about this, I said. Of course. Maya's smile snapped back into place. But don't take too long. The notary's time is expensive, and we really should get this handled today. I walked to the kitchen, my legs somehow still holding me upright. Behind me, I could hear Maya whispering urgently to David, but I couldn't make out the words.
Didn't need to.
I understood perfectly what was happening. My son had married a predator, and I was the prey. But as I stood there gripping the edge of my kitchen counter, staring out at the storm, I felt something shift inside me. Not despair. I'd felt enough of that to last 3 lifetimes. Not even anger, though that would come later. What I felt was clarity. Cold, sharp, unforgiving clarity. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old woman who'd roll over and play dead when pressured. They thought wrong. I'd been fighting for what mattered since before Maya was born. I'd buried a husband, raised a son alone, survived cancer, job loss, financial ruin, and every other catastrophe life had thrown at me. I'd rebuilt my world from nothing but determination and love. If they wanted a war, they'd picked the wrong woman to fight. I walked back to the living room with a smile on my face. You know what? I think I need to discuss this with my attorney first, just to make sure I understand all the implications. Maya's face went pale. Your attorney? Oh yes, dear. James Hendricks has been handling my affairs for 20 years. Very thorough man. He'll want to review every document before I sign anything. The notary was already packing up his briefcase. Smart man, he could smell trouble brewing. Mom, David said, his voice pleading now, why are you making this so complicated? I'm not making it complicated, sweetheart, I said, my voice gentle as poison. I'm just being careful. Surely you want your mother to be careful with important decisions. They left 15 minutes later, Maya's mask finally slipping enough to show the fury underneath. As their car disappeared down the rain-slick street, I stood in my doorway and smiled. Let the games begin. The phone started ringing at 7 the next morning. Maya, of course, her voice dripping with false concern. Mom Felicia, I hope you're not upset about yesterday. We're just trying to help, you know. David's so worried about you being all alone in that big house. Worried.
Right.
I'd raised that boy for 35 years, and he'd never expressed a single concern about me living alone until he married a woman who saw my home as her personal lottery ticket. I'm fine, dear, I said, stirring my coffee. Just taking my time to make sure I understand everything. Well, maybe we could meet for lunch today? Just us girls? I feel like we got off on the wrong foot. The wrong foot. As if attempted theft was just a social misunderstanding. That sounds lovely, I lied. But I have an appointment this morning. With my attorney. The silence on the other end was deafening. Your attorney? Mom Felicia, I really don't think that's necessary. We're family. We can work this out ourselves. Of course we can, sweetheart. After I understand exactly what I'd be signing. I hung up before she could respond. 20 minutes later, David called. Mom, what are you doing? Maya's really upset. She thinks you don't trust her. Should I trust her, David? Another silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. She's my wife, Mom. That doesn't answer my question. Look, I know the house thing seems sudden, but we've been talking about this for months. Even before the wedding. Maya's got some great ideas about investments and… Before the wedding? I interrupted. You've been planning to take my house since before you got married? It's not taking, Mom. It's planning. Estate planning. Smart financial planning. Smart financial planning. They'd been discussing my property, like I was already dead. Planning my future without me. Deciding what I needed, what I deserved, what I should be grateful for. David, I said, my voice steady as stone, I want you to listen to me very carefully. This is my house. I bought it with your father 47 years ago. I've paid every mortgage payment, every tax bill, every repair cost. I've earned every board, every nail, every shingle. And no one, not you, not Maya, not anyone, is going to take it from me while I'm still breathing. Mom, we're done talking about this. I hung up and immediately dialed James Hendrick's office. If they wanted to play legal games, I'd make sure I had the best player on my team. James had been my attorney since Richard died. A sharp man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He listened without interruption as I explained about Maya and David's visit, the papers they'd wanted me to sign, the pressure tactics they'd used. Power of attorney without informed consent, he said when I finished. Property transfer under duress. If they'd succeeded, it would have been textbook elder abuse. What can I do? First, we document everything. Every conversation, every visit, every attempt to pressure you. Second, we make sure your will and estate planning are ironclad. And third, he smiled, we let them show their true colors. What do you mean? People like your daughter-in-law don't give up easy. She's going to escalate. And when she does, we'll be ready. That afternoon, I drove to the bank and put all my important documents in a safety deposit box. The original deed to the house, my will, insurance policies, everything Maya might try to get her hands on. Then I stopped by the hardware store and had new locks installed on every door. If Maya thought she could just walk into my house whenever she pleased, she had another think coming. I was watering my roses when she showed up the next evening. She tried her key in the front door, and I watched through the window as confusion crossed her face when it wouldn't turn. She knocked. Polite at first, then more insistent. Mom Felicia? Are you home? The door's not opening. I took my time answering, making sure my face showed nothing but innocent confusion. Oh my goodness, Maya. I'm so sorry. I had the locks changed yesterday. Security company recommended it after there were some break-ins in the neighborhood. Her smile was strained.
Break-ins?
I didn't hear about any break-ins. Oh yes, very concerning. Would you like to come in? I can make some tea. She followed me to the kitchen, and I could feel her eyes scanning everything, looking for something she could use. Some sign of confusion or forgetfulness she could exploit. Mom Felicia, she said, settling into a chair at my kitchen table, David and I are really concerned about you. This obsession with attorneys and security systems, it's not like you. Obsession. Protecting myself from theft was now an obsession. I'm just being careful, dear. At my age, you can't be too cautious. But we're family. You shouldn't need to be cautious with family. I set a cup of tea in front of her and smiled. Tell me, Maya, what made you fall in love with David? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? Well, I'm curious. You barely knew each other 6 months before you got engaged. That's quite a whirlwind romance. Her hand tightened around the teacup. When you know, you know. And what did you know? That David was special,
Kind.
caring, the kind of man who'd take care of his family. Take care of his family. Interesting choice of words. And what about David's family attracted you? She was getting uncomfortable now, shifting in her chair. I don't understand. Well, you seemed very interested in our family history at the wedding, asking about the house, the property values, how long we'd lived here. Most new brides are more focused on their honeymoon plans. Maya's cheeks flushed pink. I was just being friendly, making conversation. Of course you were, dear. I sipped my tea and watched her squirm. It's funny, though. David never mentioned you were interested in real estate. I'm not particularly, because I had the strangest call yesterday. From Patterson Realty? They said someone claiming to represent me had been asking about property values in this neighborhood. Isn't that odd? The color drained from her face. I wouldn't know anything about that. No, I'm sure you wouldn't. I smiled again. More tea? She left 20 minutes later, claiming she had to get home to cook dinner for David. But I'd seen the panic in her eyes. She knew I was onto her, and she knew her easy mark wasn't going to be so easy after all. That night, I sat in my living room with a cup of chamomile tea and my mother's old photo albums. Pictures of Richard and me as newlyweds, of David as a baby, of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and lazy summer afternoons. A lifetime of memories built within these walls. Maya thought she could waltz in and steal my history, my security, my peace. She thought she could manipulate my son into betraying everything we'd built together. She was about to learn that some women don't go gentle into that good night. Some of us fight back. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when it involves attempted fraud and family betrayal. By Friday morning, my phone was ringing off the hook with friends who'd heard rumors about trouble with David's new wife. Margaret Sullivan called first. We'd been in the same bridge club for 15 years, and she had a nose for scandal that could sniff out trouble from 3 counties away. Felicia, honey, is it true what I'm hearing? That new daughter-in-law of yours tried to get you to sign over your house? I'd learned long ago that in situations like this, the truth was your best weapon. She brought a notary to my living room, Margaret. Had papers all ready for my signature. Power of attorney, property transfer, the works. The gasp on the other end was audible. Lord have mercy. And David stood there and let it happen. That afternoon, my living room filled up with women I'd known for decades. Margaret brought her famous lemon bars. Dorothy Chen from down the street showed up with a casserole and a fierce expression. Helen Kowalski from the church choir arrived with homemade bread and righteous indignation. This happened to my sister in Florida, Dorothy said, settling her small frame into my armchair with the authority of a general planning battle strategy. Daughter-in-law convinced her to sign some papers, then boom. Suddenly she's in a nursing home, and her house is sold. What did she do? I asked. Fought back. Got lawyers involved. Turns out the daughter-in-law had been forging documents for months. She's in prison now. Helen nodded vigorously. My cousin dealt with something similar. Son's wife convinced him his mother needed care and got guardianship. Took everything. The poor woman died in state custody. These weren't just stories, they were warnings. Templates for what Maya was planning to do to me. The thing is, Margaret said, leaning forward with the intensity of a woman who'd survived the Depression and 2 wars, these predators count on us being isolated. They separate us from our support systems, make us doubt ourselves, convince everyone we're losing our minds. Well, I said, looking around at these fierce women who'd gathered in my defense, I'm not isolated. Damn right you're not, Dorothy said, her tiny fist hitting my coffee table for emphasis. What do you need us to do? Over the next 2 hours, we developed what Margaret dubbed Operation Grandma Bear, a support network designed to protect me from Maya's escalating schemes and document everything that happened. Helen volunteered to drive me to all my appointments, ensuring I was never alone when Maya might try to ambush me with more papers to sign. Dorothy, whose late husband had been a police detective, offered to help me research Maya's background. Margaret, whose son was a lawyer in Boston, would serve as liaison with James Hendricks. And, Margaret added with a smile that would have made a shark nervous, we're going to make sure Maya knows she's being watched. Nothing illegal, mind you. Just community involvement. That evening, I was washing dishes when I saw Maya's car pull into my driveway. Instead of hiding or pretending not to be home, I called Margaret. She's here, I said simply. Give us 5 minutes. Maya was halfway up my front walk when Margaret's car pulled up behind hers. Then Dorothy's. Then Helen's. By the time Maya reached my front door, she had an audience of 3 very interested senior citizens pretending to examine my roses. I opened the door with a smile. Maya, dear, how lovely to see you. Are you here for the Bridge Club meeting? Bridge Club meeting? Maya glanced nervously at the women in my yard. Oh, yes, we meet here every Friday evening. I thought I mentioned it. Would you like to join us? We could always use a 4th. The trapped look on Maya's face was priceless. I just came by to see how you were doing. After our conversation yesterday. How thoughtful. Won't you come in? I'm sure the ladies would love to meet you properly. What followed was the most uncomfortable 30 minutes of Maya's life. 3 women in their 70s politely grilled her about her background, her family, her intentions toward David, and her sudden interest in estate planning. They asked with the sweet innocence of grandmothers, but with the precision of prosecuting attorneys. And where did you and David meet? Margaret asked, her voice dripping honey. At a coffee shop downtown. How romantic. Which one? I love discovering new places. Maya's hesitation was barely noticeable. Starbucks. Which Starbucks, dear? There are several downtown. The one on Main Street. Dorothy and I exchanged glances. There was no Starbucks on Main Street. And what do you do for work? Helen chimed in. I'm between jobs right now. The wedding was expensive, and we decided I should take some time to settle in. Between jobs. Convenient excuse for having no visible means of support except what she could extract from her new husband's family. Well, Margaret said, standing up with a kind of smile that indicated the interrogation was over. It's been so lovely meeting you properly, dear. I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot more of each other. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Maya mumbled something about needing to get home and practically fled. After she left, Dorothy turned to me with grim satisfaction. That girl is lying about something. The story about where they met? Total fiction. I'd bet money on it. Can you find out the truth? I asked. Honey, I've got contacts in 3 states and a computer. By Monday, I'll know where Maya really came from, what she was doing before she met David, and probably what she had for breakfast last Tuesday. As my friends prepared to leave, Margaret pulled me aside. Felicia, I want you to know something. Whatever that girl is planning, whatever move she makes next, you're not facing it alone. We've got your back. I'd spent the last week feeling betrayed and isolated, wondering how my own son could turn against me. But sitting in my living room surrounded by women who'd chosen to stand with me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the power of chosen family. Maya had David, but I had something stronger. I had sisters in arms who understood that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who are supposed to love you. And sometimes the people who save you are the ones who choose to stand by your side when everyone else walks away. This wasn't just about my house anymore. This was about something bigger. About refusing to be pushed aside, dismissed, or forgotten just because I was older. About proving that experience and wisdom and sheer stubborn determination could triumph over youth and greed and calculated cruelty. Maya wanted a war?
Fine.
But she was about to discover she wasn't just fighting one 76-year-old woman. She was fighting an entire army of grandmothers who'd survived everything life could throw at them and were ready to prove that the most dangerous thing in the world is a woman with nothing left to lose. Dorothy Chun was a woman of her word. By Monday morning, she was sitting at my kitchen table with a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse and an expression that could have curdled milk. "Your daughter-in-law is a piece of work," she announced, spreading papers across my table like evidence at a crime scene. "Real name is Maya Christine Volkov. She's been Maya Andrews for exactly 3 months." I poured us both coffee and settled in for what I suspected would be a very educational morning. "Tell me everything." Dorothy opened the folder with the efficiency of a seasoned detective. Born in Cleveland, 1989. Dropped out of 3 different colleges. No steady employment history, just a string of part-time jobs and mysterious gaps. But here's where it gets interesting. She pulled out a stack of newspaper clippings. 2 years ago, she was living in Tampa, Florida, engaged to a 78-year-old widower named Frank Morrison. My blood went cold. Engaged to an elderly man? Morrison died 6 months later. Heart attack, very sudden. Left everything to Maya in a will that was changed just 3 weeks before his death. Did she inherit? She would have, except Morrison's daughter contested the will. During the court proceedings, they discovered Maya had been lying about her background, had outstanding warrants for check fraud in Ohio, and had been married twice before under different names. I stared at the papers, my hands trembling slightly. What happened? Morrison's daughter won. Maya got nothing and skipped town before the DA could file charges. Next thing you know, she turns up here with a new name and a sob story about wanting to start fresh. And David bought it. Your son met her at a grief counseling group, Felicia. She was claiming to be a recent widow, said her husband died in a car accident. Very sympathetic story. Very calculated. I felt sick. My son, still struggling with his father's death after all these years, had been targeted by a professional predator who'd used his grief against him. There's more, Dorothy continued, pulling out printouts from social media. Before she met David, Maya was posting pictures from expensive restaurants, designer clothes, jewelry. Her lifestyle was way above what her employment history could support. Sugar daddy, I said grimly. Multiple sugar daddies, from what I can tell. She's got a type. Older men, recently widowed, financially comfortable, emotionally vulnerable. The picture was becoming horrifyingly clear. Maya wasn't just a gold digger. She was a serial predator who specialized in exploiting elderly people. And David, my grieving, trusting son, had been her perfect mark. Does David know any of this? Dorothy shook her head. I doubt it. She's good at what she does. Creates an entirely new identity for each target, complete with backstory and fake references. I studied the timeline Dorothy had constructed. Maya had met David just 2 months after fleeing Florida. She'd been planning this con from the moment she arrived in town. What about her family? The cousin I met at the grocery store? That's the interesting part. I couldn't find any record of a Jessica Morrison connected to Maya. No family connections at all, actually. I think your grocery store encounter was staged. Of course it was. Maya had used Jessica to plant the story about my house being sold, to make it seem like a done deal before I'd even agreed to anything. Dorothy, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me, I need you to document everything. Every detail, every connection, every lie. If Maya thinks she can run the same con on my family that she's been running on others, she's about to learn the hard way that this grandmother bites back. That afternoon, I called James Hendricks and filled him in on Dorothy's findings. There was a long silence on the other end when I finished. Mrs. Andrews, he said finally, this changes everything. If Maya has a history of elder fraud, if she's been using multiple identities, we're not just looking at attempted theft. We're looking at a pattern of criminal behavior. What do? First, we contact the authorities in Florida. If there are outstanding warrants, they'll want to know where she is. Second, we gather every piece of evidence we can about her current activities. And third, we protect you. Protect me how? Security cameras around your property. Recording devices for any future conversations with her or David. Legal documents that make it impossible for her to claim you're incompetent or coerced. That seems extreme. Mrs. Andrews, based on what you've told me, your daughter-in-law is a career criminal who specializes in victimizing people exactly like you. Extreme measures are exactly what's called for. That evening, I sat in my living room with the folder Dorothy had compiled, reading through every piece of evidence about the woman my son had married. The fake names, the abandoned engagements, the elderly victims, the pattern of lies and manipulation that stretched back years. I thought about David, how happy he'd seemed on his wedding day. How he'd told me Maya was the best thing that had ever happened to him. How he'd looked at her like she was salvation itself. Maya hadn't just targeted my property. She'd weaponized my son's loneliness, his grief, his desperate need for love. She'd turned him into an accomplice in her scheme, convinced him that betraying his mother was somehow an act of devotion to his wife. The phone rang. David. Mom? Maya said some of your friends came by Friday night. She said they were asking a lot of personal questions. They were being friendly, David, getting to know your wife. It made her uncomfortable. She feels like you don't trust her. I closed my eyes. My son, my baby, was defending a woman who'd lied about everything from her name to her entire history. A woman who saw him as nothing more than a pathway to my property. David, I said, do you know where Maya worked before you met her? She was taking care of her sick mother in Florida.
Why?
Another lie. Maya's mother had died when she was 12. That much was in Dorothy's file. Just curious about her background. You know how mothers are. Mom, I need you to stop investigating Maya. It's making her nervous, and it's making me nervous. Can't you just trust that I know what I'm doing? Do you know what you're doing, David? Silence. Then, quietly, I love her, Mom. I know you do, sweetheart. But does she love you? Of course she does. But there was doubt in his voice now. Maybe he was starting to see the cracks in Maya's perfect facade. Then she won't mind if people get to know her better, I said gently. After all, she's part of our family now. After I hung up, I looked around my living room. At the photos of David through the years, the memories embedded in every stick of furniture, the life I'd built within these walls. Maya thought she could steal all of this by manipulating my son and exploiting my love for him. She thought she could isolate me, confuse me, pressure me into surrendering everything I'd worked for. She'd picked the wrong target. I wasn't some vulnerable widow with no one to protect her. I had allies, resources, determination, and most importantly, I had the truth on my side. Maya had built her entire scheme on lies, but lies have a way of collapsing under the weight of reality. And reality was about to come crashing down on her like a house of cards in a hurricane. The war was just beginning, and I intended to win. Maya made her next move the following Tuesday, and it was a masterpiece of manipulation that almost made me admire her skill. Almost. I was in my garden, deadheading the roses, when she appeared at my back gate with tears streaming down her face and David's car keys clutched in her shaking hand. Mom Felicia, she sobbed, I need your help. Something terrible has happened. Despite everything I knew about her, every instinct screamed at me to comfort this apparently distraught young woman. That's the thing about sociopaths. They're magnificent actors. What's wrong, dear? I asked, setting down my pruning shears. It's David. He's been in an accident. He's at Mass General, and they won't tell me anything because I'm not, because we're not. She dissolved into fresh tears. They need family consent for the surgery, and you're listed as his emergency contact. My blood turned to ice. Whatever Maya was, liar, fraud, predator, David was still my son. If he was hurt, what kind of accident? I asked, already moving toward the house.
Car accident en route 95.
He was unconscious when they brought him in. They said something about internal bleeding, possible head trauma. Mom, Felicia, I'm so scared. I grabbed my purse and keys, my hands shaking as Maya continued her tearful performance in the passenger seat of my car. She guided me through downtown traffic, giving directions through her sobs, painting a picture of David lying broken and alone in some hospital bed. We pulled into the parking garage of what I thought was Mass General, but as we walked toward the entrance, something felt wrong. The building was too small, too quiet. The signs were different. Maya, I said, stopping in the parking lot. This isn't Mass General. What? She looked around with convincing confusion. Oh God, I must have given you wrong directions. I'm so upset. I can't think straight. It's actually the medical center on. She rattled off another address, more tears, more panic. That's when I knew. There was no accident. There was no injured David. This was all an elaborate setup, and I'd walked right into it. Let me call David, I said, pulling out my phone. No. Maya's hand shot out to stop me, and for just a second, the mask slipped. Her eyes were cold, calculating, desperate. Then the tears started again. I already tried calling him. The phone was destroyed in the accident. I dialed David's number anyway. It rang twice before he answered. Hi, Mom. What's up? Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by white-hot rage. Maya was standing 3 feet away, claiming David was unconscious in a hospital while he was answering his phone like nothing was wrong. David, I said carefully, where are you right now? At work.
Why?
You sound weird. I'm fine. Just checking on you. Have a good day, sweetheart. I hung up and turned to face Maya. She'd gone very still, like a predator caught in a trap. Interesting, I said, my voice calm as winter. David seems to have made a remarkable recovery. Maya's face cycled through several expressions: panic, anger, calculation, and finally resignation. When she spoke again, her voice was completely different. No tears, no trembling, just cold determination. You couldn't just sign the papers, could you? You had to make this difficult. What was this supposed to accomplish, Maya? Where were you planning to take me? She glanced around the parking lot, maybe calculating whether she could salvage this disaster. I have a friend who works at Riverside Psychiatric. One phone call about an elderly woman showing signs of dementia, wandering around confused, and they'd hold you for evaluation. The psychiatric hospital. Of course. Maya had planned to have me committed, declared incompetent, and removed from the equation entirely. David would have arrived home to find his mother missing and his wife with a heartbreaking story about sudden mental decline and necessary intervention. Very clever, I said. How long do psychiatric holds last? 72 hours minimum for evaluation. Longer if they find cause for concern, and with the right symptoms presented correctly. She shrugged. Some people never leave. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. Maya hadn't just been planning to steal my house. She'd been planning to steal my life, my freedom, my very existence. And David would have believed you? David believes everything I tell him. He's pathetic that way. So desperate to be loved that he'll accept any story that doesn't threaten his fantasy. The contempt in her voice when she talked about my son, the man she'd married, the man she claimed to love, revealed more about Maya's true nature than all of Dorothy's research combined. You really don't care about him at all, do you? Maya laughed, and the sound was like glass breaking. Care about him? He's a means to an end, Felicia. A very effective one, as it turns out. Your son is so hungry for affection that he'd sell his own mother if I asked him sweetly enough. He'd never. He already has. Who do you think gave me your financial information? Your social security number? The details I needed to contact those real estate agents. Maya's smile was venomous. David's been helping me plan your future since our second date. The words hit me like physical blows. My son, my baby, had been actively participating in Maya's scheme from almost the beginning. He hadn't been slowly manipulated or gradually turned against me. He'd been a willing collaborator in my destruction. I want to go home, I said quietly. I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, I've already called Riverside. Told them about my poor mother-in-law's concerning behavior. They're expecting us. I looked around the parking lot. We were alone, isolated, and Maya clearly had no intention of letting me leave. She'd lured me here under false pretenses, and now she was going to follow through with her plan to have me committed. But Maya had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated me one too many times. Before we go in, I said, reaching into my purse, I want you to know something. What? I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. The call to David was still connected. The entire conversation, Maya's confession, her contempt for David, her detailed explanation of the psychiatric hold plan, had been recorded. Maya's face went white. How long has that been recording? Since the moment you told me about David's accident. Every lie, every threat, every word of your little scheme is documented. Give me that phone. I don't think so. I backed toward my car, finger hovering over the emergency call button. You see, Maya, while you were studying how to manipulate elderly people, I was learning a few things myself. Dorothy Chen taught me about voice-activated recording apps. Very handy for women my age who want to protect themselves from predators. Maya lunged for the phone, but I was already moving. 76 years old or not, I'd been walking these legs for longer than she'd been alive, and desperation gave me speed. Help! I shouted as I ran toward the medical center entrance. Someone help me. This woman is trying to have me falsely committed. Maya caught up to me at the doors, but it was too late. Security guards were already emerging, drawn by my shouts. Other people in the parking lot had turned to stare. Ma'am, one of the guards said, what's the problem here? This woman lured me here under false pretenses, I said, slightly out of breath but triumphant. She told me my son had been in an accident, then tried to force me into psychiatric commitment. It's all recorded on my phone. Maya tried one last desperate play. Officer, I'm this woman's daughter-in-law. She's been showing signs of dementia, paranoid delusions. We're here for a voluntary evaluation. Voluntary? I held up my phone. Would you like to hear the recording where she explains her plan to have me committed against my will? Where she admits to lying about my son's accident? Where she talks about stealing my property? The security guard looked between us, clearly trying to assess the situation. Maya, young and crying and apparently concerned. Me, elderly but lucid and armed with evidence. Ma'am, he said to me, would you like us to call the police? Yes, I said firmly. I would like to press charges for attempted kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy to commit false imprisonment. Maya's last gamble was to run. She made it halfway across the parking lot before the second security guard caught her. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the medical center's administrative office, giving my statement to Detective Sarah Martinez while Maya sat handcuffed in the back of a police cruiser. Mrs. Andrews, Detective Martinez said after listening to the recording, this is pretty damning evidence. Combined with the background information you mentioned your friend compiled, we're looking at multiple felony charges. What happens now? We arrest Ms. Volkov, or whatever her real name is. We coordinate with the authorities in Florida, and we make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. As we walked out to the parking lot, I could see Maya in the back of the police car, no longer crying, no longer pretending to be anything other than what she was, a predator caught in her own trap. "Oh," Detective Martinez added, "you'll need to call your son. He's going to want to hear about this from you before he hears it from us." I looked at my phone, still displaying the recorded conversation where Maya had described David as pathetic and revealed his complicity in her scheme. My son, who I'd raised to be honest and kind, had betrayed me more thoroughly than I'd ever imagined possible. "Detective," I said, "I think my son already knows more about this than he's let on." As Maya's police car pulled away, I stood in that parking lot and realized that while I'd won this battle, the war was far from over. Maya was going to prison, but David was still out there, still believing her lies, still thinking I was the villain in this story. The worst part? I wasn't sure anymore if he was another one of Maya's victims, or if he'd been a willing participant all along. Either way, my son and I were about to have a conversation that would change everything between us forever. I drove home in complete silence, my hands shaking on the steering wheel as the magnitude of what had just happened sank in. Maya was in police custody, her scheme unraveled, her lies exposed. But the victory felt hollow because the biggest betrayal hadn't come from a stranger, it had come from my own son. David's car was in my driveway when I pulled up. He was sitting on the front porch steps, his head in his hands, looking like a man whose world had just collapsed around him. He looked up as I approached, and I could see he'd been crying. "Mom, the police called me. They said Maya was arrested. They said..." His voice broke. "They said she tried to have you committed to a psychiatric hospital." "Yes," I said simply. "She did." "That's impossible. Maya would never. She loves you. She's been trying to help you." I pulled out my phone and played the recording. All of it. Maya's fake emergency, her cold confession, her contempt for David, her admission that he'd been helping her from the beginning. David's face went through a series of transformations as he listened: confusion, denial, horror, and finally, devastation. When Maya's voice described him as pathetic and desperate, he flinched like he'd been physically struck. "Mom," he whispered when the recording ended, "I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know she was planning this." "But you knew about the rest of it," I said, sitting down on the step beside him. "The real estate agents, the property information, the financial details." He nodded miserably. "She said it was just research. For planning our future. She said we needed to understand your assets, so we could help you make smart decisions when you were ready." "And you believed her?" I wanted to believe her. His voice was small, broken. "Mom, after Dad died, after all those years of being alone, Maya made me feel like I was worth something. Like someone could actually love me." I felt something crack in my chest. Not my anger, that was still burning bright, but something softer. The part of me that remembered rocking this broken man when he was a scared little boy. "David, you've always been worth something. You've always been loved. But not the way Maya loved me. Or the way I thought she loved me." He laughed bitterly. "God, I'm such an idiot." We sat in silence for a while, watching the sun set behind the oak trees. Finally, David spoke again. "What she said about the psychiatric hospital, she would have had you locked up?" "That was the plan. 72 hours minimum, possibly permanent if she could convince them I was incompetent. And I would have believed her. If she'd come home and told me you'd had a breakdown, that you needed professional help." He shook his head. "I would have believed every word." "Yes," I said. "You would have. How long have you known?" "About Maya, about what she really is." I told him about Dorothy's investigation, about Maya's history of targeting elderly victims, about the pattern of lies and manipulation that stretched back years. "She never loved me at all," David said when I finished. "It wasn't a question."
No, sweetheart.
"She didn't. And I helped her try to destroy you."
Yes.
"You did." David turned to look at me, his eyes red with tears and something deeper, shame, regret, the terrible clarity that comes when you finally see yourself clearly. Can you ever forgive me? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, who'd been willing to betray me for a woman who saw him as nothing more than a useful tool. I thought about the 35 years I'd spent putting him first, the dreams I'd deferred, the life I'd built around his needs and happiness. I thought about the moment when he'd stood in my living room and suggested I didn't deserve to live in my own home. The way he'd avoided my eyes when Maya laid out her papers. The financial information he'd provided, the trust he'd violated, the love he'd weaponized against me. I can forgive you, I said finally, but I can't forget. And I can't pretend this didn't happen. What does that mean? It means you're not my son anymore, David. Not in the way that matters. The words came out calmly, matter-of-factly, like I was discussing the weather. But they hit David like a physical blow. Mom, please. I've changed my will. You don't inherit anything. The house is going into a preservation trust when I die. My savings are going to charity. You'll get exactly what you tried to steal from me. Nothing. I don't care about the money. Yes, you do. Maybe not only about the money, but you care. You cared enough to give Maya my financial information. You cared enough to stand by while she tried to pressure me into signing over my home. You cared enough to believe her lies about what was best for me instead of asking me what I wanted. David was crying now, ugly sobs that shook his whole body. Mom, she fooled me. She fooled everyone. Even you liked her at first. The difference is, when I learned the truth, I fought back. When you learn the truth, you make excuses. That's not fair. Fair. I stood up, all the rage I'd been holding back finally boiling over. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been my son protecting me instead of helping a stranger steal from me. Fair would have been you questioning Maya's motives instead of blindly following her lead. Fair would have been you remembering that I'm the woman who worked 2 jobs to put you through college, who nursed you through every illness, who sacrificed everything to give you the best life I could. I know what you did for me, and I'm grateful. Grateful? I laughed, and the sound was harsh even to my own ears. You think gratitude is enough? You think saying, thank you, erases 30 years of love and sacrifice? You helped a criminal try to steal my home, David. You were willing to see me locked away in a psychiatric hospital if it meant getting what you wanted. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. David reached for me, but I stepped back. Mom, please. Give me a chance to make this right. There is no making this right. There's only moving forward. And I'm moving forward without you. I walked toward my front door, then stopped and turned back. Maya's being charged with attempted kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy. The police will probably want to talk to you about what information you gave her. I suggest you get a lawyer. Are you going to press charges against me too? I looked at him sitting there on my porch steps, broken and pathetic and finally understanding the consequences of his choices. No, I said. Living with what you've done is punishment enough. I went inside and locked the door behind me. I didn't look back. From my kitchen window, I watched David sit on those steps for another hour, crying like the child he'd never really stopped being. Finally, he got his car and drove away. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the silence of my empty house. For the first time in weeks, it felt peaceful, safe.
Mine.
Maya was going to prison. David was out of my life. The house was protected. I'd won. So why did victory taste so much like grief? The story hit the local news 3 days later. Elderly woman foils daughter-in-law's elaborate fraud scheme. The reporter made me sound like some kind of superhero, which was flattering but inaccurate. I wasn't a hero. I was just a woman who'd refused to be anyone's victim. Maya's arraignment was a circus. Reporters, cameras, and a parade of other victims who'd come forward after seeing the news coverage. Turned out Maya's real name was Maria Volkova, and she'd been running similar cons across 3 states for nearly a decade. James Hendricks called me with updates. She's looking at 15 to 20 years, Mrs. Andrews. The prosecutor is calling it a pattern of predatory behavior against vulnerable elderly victims. Good, I said. What about extradition to Florida? That's being discussed. The victim's daughter down there wants to see justice done for her father. I felt a grim satisfaction knowing that Maya would finally face consequences for all the lives she destroyed. But it didn't erase the damage she'd done to my own family. David tried calling multiple times. I didn't answer. He sent flowers with a card that said, "I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I love you." I threw them in the trash without reading it twice. He showed up at my door exactly 1 week after Maya's arrest. I watched him through the peephole, thinner, unshaven, wearing the same clothes he'd had on 3 days earlier. He looked like a man who hadn't been sleeping. "Mom," he called through the door. "I know you're in there. Please just talk to me." I didn't answer. I've been to therapy. 3 sessions already. Dr. Williams says I have codependency issues, that I was vulnerable to manipulation because of unresolved grief about Dad. He says with work, I can... Go away, David. There was silence on the other side of the door. Then, quietly, I lost my job. I almost opened the door then. Almost. The maternal instinct to comfort my child in crisis was strong, even after everything that had happened. The arrest made the news, he continued. My boss said having an employee connected to a fraud case was bad for the company image. HR called it termination due to association with criminal activity. I pressed my forehead against the door, fighting the urge to let him in, to fix his problems like I'd been doing his entire life. I can't afford the apartment anymore. We'd been living on credit cards, loans against my 401k. I thought she was handling the finances, but she was just accumulating debt.
Of course she was.
That's what predators do. They don't just steal your assets, they saddle you with their liabilities. Mom, I know I don't deserve help. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I have nowhere else to go. You should have thought of that before you tried to steal my house. Another long silence. When David spoke again, his voice was broken. She told me you didn't really need this place anymore, that you'd be happier somewhere smaller, with people to take care of you. She made it sound like we were helping you. And you believed her, because it was easier than admitting you wanted my property for yourself. Yes. The admission was barely audible. God help me, yes. At least he was finally being honest. David, I said, for 35 years, I put your needs ahead of my own. I worked jobs I hated to pay for your education. I gave up relationships, opportunities, dreams, all so you could have the best life possible. And the moment a pretty woman convinced you I was expendable, you threw it all away. I know. You don't get to fix this with therapy and apologies. You don't get to come back and pretend it never happened. You made your choice, and now you live with the consequences. I heard him slump against the door. What am I supposed to do? The same thing everyone else does when they hit bottom. You figure it out yourself. I walked away from the door and turned up the television so I couldn't hear if he said anything else. An hour later, I looked out the window and saw his car was gone. That night, Margaret called to check on me. How are you holding up, honey? I'm fine, I said, which was mostly true. You don't sound fine. You sound sad. I was quiet for a long moment. I am sad. Not because I made the wrong choice, but because I had to make it at all. Cutting David off was the right thing to do. I know, but that doesn't make it easy. The hardest thing about being a mother, Margaret said, is knowing when to stop being one. She was right. I'd spent 35 years being David's mother, his protector, his safety net. But somewhere along the way, he'd stopped being my son, stopped being the person I'd raised him to be. Maya hadn't corrupted him. She'd simply revealed who he really was underneath all my hopes and expectations. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under my front door. David's handwriting, my name on the outside. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Mom, I'm leaving town. I can't stay here knowing what I did to you, seeing the disappointment in your eyes every time you look at me. I want you to know that every good thing about me came from you. Every moral I had, every principle I followed, every moment of decency, you taught me all of that. The fact that I threw it away doesn't diminish what you gave me. Maya didn't make me betray you. She just gave me permission to do what some part of me had always wanted to do. And I have to live with that knowledge for the rest of my life. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that losing you is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. Worse than losing Dad, worse than losing Maya, worse than losing everything else combined. I hope you have a beautiful life in that house you fought so hard to protect. You earned it. I love you, even though I lost the right to say so. David. I read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and put it in the drawer with all the other important documents I'd accumulated over the years. Not because I was planning to forgive him, but because it was the end of something that had started 35 years ago when I first held him in my arms. David was gone. Maya was in prison. The house was safe. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt empty. But emptiness, I was learning, was better than being filled with other people's betrayal. Emptiness was honest. Emptiness was clean. And emptiness, unlike love, couldn't be weaponized against you. 3 months after Maya's sentencing, she got 18 years, which felt like justice but couldn't undo the damage. I was sitting in my kitchen reading the morning paper when the doorbell rang. A young woman stood on my porch, maybe 25, with David's eyes and my late husband's stubborn chin. I knew who she was before she introduced herself. Mrs. Andrews?
I'm Sarah.
Sarah Chin. I was David's fiancée. Before Maya. I'd heard about Sarah from David over the years. His college girlfriend, the one who got away, the relationship that ended when they wanted different things from life. She'd moved to California for graduate school, and David had stayed here, nursing his heartbreak and apparently making it available for the first manipulative woman who came along. Hello, Sarah. Would you like some coffee? She followed me to the kitchen, and I could feel her looking around, taking in the house David had once shared with her during weekend visits home from college. I heard about what happened, she said when we were settled at the table. With Maya, with David. I wanted to. I'm not sure what I wanted, actually. To apologize, maybe? You have nothing to apologize for, dear. I feel responsible somehow. If David and I hadn't broken up, if he hadn't been so lonely, Maya would have found another victim. Predators always do. Sarah was quiet for a moment, stirring sugar into her coffee.
David called me last week.
He's in Portland now, working construction, living in a studio apartment. He wanted me to know he was sorry. For everything. Are you here to plead his case? No, she said firmly. I'm here because I wanted to meet the woman who raised the best parts of him. And because I wanted to tell you something. What's that? David isn't the man I fell in love with anymore. Whatever Maya did to him, whatever choices he made, the person I knew is gone. But the qualities I loved in him, his kindness, his sense of humor, his loyalty, those came from you. I felt my throat tighten. Those qualities didn't stop him from betraying me. No, they didn't. But they're still real, even if he buried them under selfishness and weakness. We talked for 2 hours. About David as a young man, about the dreams he'd had, about the person he'd been before grief and loneliness made him vulnerable to someone like Maya. It was painful but oddly healing, like examining an old wound to see how it had scarred. As Sarah was leaving, she turned back. "Mrs. Andrews, would you mind if I visited again sometime? I don't have any family here, and talking to you about David, it helps me remember the good parts." "I'd like that very much." After she left, I sat in my living room and realized something had shifted. For months, I'd been defined by what I'd lost: my relationship with David, my faith in family, my sense of security. But talking to Sarah reminded me of what I'd gained. I'd gained clarity about who I really was and what I would and wouldn't accept. I'd gained a community of women who valued my wisdom and strength. I'd gained the knowledge that I could face the worst kind of betrayal and come out stronger. Most importantly, I'd gained my freedom. The next day, I called the volunteer coordinator at the local domestic violence shelter. I'd been thinking about what Dorothy had said months ago, that predators like Maya counted on their victims being isolated, having no one to turn to for help. "I'd like to volunteer," I told the coordinator. "I'm a 76-year-old woman who just survived an attempt by my daughter-in-law to steal my house and have me committed to a psychiatric facility. I think I might have some useful experience to share." Within a week, I was attending training sessions on financial abuse, elder fraud, and family manipulation. The other volunteers were mostly younger women who'd survived domestic violence, but they welcomed me with the fierce solidarity of survivors. "The thing about family abuse," said Elena, a woman my age whose son had tried to steal her business, "is that people don't want to believe it happens. They think family love protects you, but sometimes family love is exactly what makes you vulnerable." I started leading support groups for elderly victims of financial abuse. Women whose children had stolen their savings, whose caregivers had forged documents, whose trusted family members had systematically isolated and exploited them. "The hardest part," said Ruth, whose daughter had cleaned out her bank account, "is that everyone expects you to forgive them because they're family." Forgiveness, I told the group, is optional. Boundaries are not. It became my catchphrase, printed on business cards and posted on bulletin boards throughout the community. Forgiveness is optional. Boundaries are not. 6 months later, I got a call from a reporter at the Boston Globe. She was working on a series about elder abuse and had heard about my work with victims. "Mrs. Andrews, would you be willing to be interviewed? Your story, surviving your daughter-in-law's scheme and then using that experience to help others, it's exactly the kind of narrative that might prevent other families from going through what you did." The article ran on the front page of the Sunday edition. "From Victim to Victor: How One Grandmother's Fight Against Fraud Became a Mission to Help Others." It included my photo, my quote about forgiveness and boundaries, and a sidebar with resources for elderly people facing financial abuse. The response was overwhelming. Letters from other victims, phone calls from families dealing with similar situations, requests for speaking engagements from senior centers and community groups. I was no longer just Felicia Andrews, the woman whose son betrayed her for a con artist. I was Felicia Andrews, advocate for elder rights and living proof that survival was possible. The house that Maya had tried to steal became the headquarters for our informal network of volunteers. My living room, where she'd once spread out fraudulent documents, now hosted support group meetings. My kitchen table, where she'd tried to manipulate me into signing away my rights, became the place where other victims planned their own fights for justice. One evening, as I was cleaning up after a particularly intense support group session, Margaret stopped by. "You look different," she said, studying my face. "Younger somehow. I feel different. Lighter. Any word from David?" I shook my head. "Sarah says he's doing well. Sober, working, going to therapy. But he hasn't tried to contact me." "Do you miss him?" It was a question I'd been avoiding for months. Did I miss my son? Did I regret cutting him out of my life so completely? "I miss who I thought he was," I said finally. "But I don't miss the anxiety, the doubt, the constant worry about his next crisis." I don't miss making excuses for his choices or cleaning up his messes. You're happier without him. It was a terrible thing to say about your own child, but it was true.
Yes.
I am. Margaret nodded. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. And sometimes the only way to heal is to let them go. That night, I sat in my garden with a glass of wine, watching the stars emerge over the house I'd fought so hard to protect. A year ago, I'd been a lonely widow whose greatest joy was her weekly phone calls with her son. Now I was a community leader, a mentor to other survivors, a woman with purpose and passion and a calendar full of meaningful commitments. Maya had tried to destroy my life, but instead she'd forced me to rebuild it into something stronger and more authentic than it had ever been before. I raised my glass to the stars and smiled. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's becoming someone your enemies could never imagine you could be. And I was becoming magnificent. 18 months after David left town, I was preparing for my weekly support group meeting when Dorothy burst through my front door without knocking, her face flushed with excitement and something that looked like concern. "Felicia," she said, catching her breath, "you need to see this." She thrust her laptop at me, open to a local news website. The headline made my blood run cold. Local man dies in Portland construction accident. It wasn't David. The name was wrong, the age was wrong, the details were wrong. But for a terrifying moment, I'd thought, why are you showing me this? I asked, my heart still racing. Look at the related stories. Dorothy scrolled down to a sidebar. Construction site safety violations lead to multiple injuries. And there, in a group photo of injured workers, was my son. David looked terrible, thin, weathered, with a scar across his left cheek and his arm in a sling. The caption identified him as one of 7 workers injured when scaffolding collapsed due to safety violations by the construction company. Is he alive but hurt? The article says 3 workers were hospitalized. David was one of them. I stared at the photo for a long time. This hollow-eyed stranger bore little resemblance to the well-fed, comfortable man who'd stood in my living room trying to steal my house. He looked like someone who'd been living hard, working dangerous jobs, paying a price for the choices he'd made. The accident was 2 weeks ago, Dorothy continued. I've been checking Portland news sites since then. He was released from the hospital after 4 days. Why are you telling me this? Dorothy closed the laptop and looked at me seriously. Because despite everything he did, he's still your son. And because in all the support groups you've led, you've never once mentioned what it's like to cut off your own child. Maybe it's time. That evening's support group was smaller than usual, just 6 women dealing with various forms of family financial abuse. We met in my living room, sitting in the circle of chairs that had become as familiar as church pews. Tonight, I said, I want to talk about something I've avoided discussing. The cost of setting boundaries with family members who've hurt us. I told them about seeing David's photo, about the construction accident, about the moment when I thought he might be dead, and realized I still wasn't sure how I felt about that possibility. Do you regret cutting him off? Asked Patricia, whose son had stolen her retirement fund. No, I said without hesitation. But I grieve for the relationship we should have had. I grieve for the son I thought I'd raised. I grieve for the 35 years I spent loving someone who turned out to be capable of betraying me so completely. But you don't regret protecting yourself?
Never.
Because the alternative would have been enabling him to destroy me completely. Sometimes love means letting go, even when it breaks your heart. Eleanor, whose daughter had tried to have her declared incompetent, raised her hand. What if he comes back? What if David shows up at your door asking for help? Then I'll do what I've trained all of you to do. I'll maintain my boundaries. I'll protect myself first, even if he's genuinely changed. I thought about that for a moment, especially if he's genuinely changed. Because if David has truly learned from his mistakes, he'll respect my decision to protect myself. If he hasn't learned, he'll try to manipulate me into giving him another chance. 3 days later, my hypothetical became reality. I was in my garden, tending to the roses my mother had planted decades ago, when a shadow fell across the flower bed. I looked up to see David standing at my back gate, looking exactly like he had in that news photo, thin, scarred, wearing clothes that had seen better days. "Hello, Mom." I stood up slowly, pulling off my gardening gloves, taking in the changes 2 years had wrought. He was still my son, still had my late husband's eyes and stubborn jaw, but he looked like a man who'd been through hell and barely made it out alive. "David, I know I have no right to be here. I know you told me to stay away. But He gestured helplessly. "I needed to see you, to know you're okay." "I'm fine. You can go now." "Mom, please. Just 5 minutes."
No.
He flinched like I'd slapped him, but he didn't argue, didn't push, didn't try to manipulate or guilt me into changing my mind. That was unexpected. "Can I at least tell you I'm sorry? One more time?" "You've already apologized. It doesn't change anything." "I know. But I understand now what I put you through. Really understand. And I wanted you to know that. Despite myself, I was curious. What made you understand?" "Getting conned myself." He laughed bitterly. "Turns out karma has a sense of humor. I met a woman in Portland. Thought she cared about me. Thought we had something real. She cleaned out what little money I had left and disappeared. Left me homeless for 2 months. I'm sorry that happened to you." "Are you? Really?" I considered the question honestly.
Yes.
I wouldn't wish that kind of betrayal on anyone, even you. But you're not surprised.
No.
I'm not surprised. We stood there in silence, the back gate between us like a metaphor for everything that had been broken between us. "I don't expect forgiveness," David said finally. "I don't expect a relationship. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I took from you. It wasn't just money or property. I took your ability to trust your own son. I took your sense of safety in your own family. I took something precious and irreplaceable, and I can never give it back." His words were so precisely what I'd needed to hear for 2 years that I almost wondered if this was another manipulation. But looking at his face, really looking, I saw something I'd never seen before, genuine understanding of the pain he'd caused. "Why are you here, David? What do you want?" "Nothing. I want nothing from you. I wanted to see you one more time before I left." "Left?" "I'm moving to Alaska. Construction job on the North Slope. Good money, isolated location, a chance to start completely over where nobody knows my history." "Running away."
Yes.
Running away from the mess I made, from the person I became, from the disappointment in people's eyes when they find out what I did to my own mother. I looked at him for a long moment. This broken man at my gate bore little resemblance to the son I'd raised or the betrayer who'd tried to steal my home. He looked like someone who'd finally learned the true cost of his choices. "David," I said quietly, "I hope you find peace in Alaska. I hope you become the man I once thought you were. I don't deserve your good wishes." "No, you don't. But I'm giving them anyway because holding on to anger hurts me more than it hurts you." He nodded, tears starting to flow down his weathered cheeks. "I love you, Mom. I know I lost the right to say that, but I need you to know it's true. I know you love me. I also know that your love wasn't strong enough to protect me when I needed it most. And that's something I can forgive, but I can't forget." "I understand."
Do you?
"Do you really understand that there's no going back? That even if you become a saint in Alaska, even if you spend the rest of your life helping others, you'll still be the son who tried to steal his mother's home?" "Yes," he whispered. "I understand." "Then go. Go to Alaska. Build a new life. Become someone better. But don't ever come back here expecting me to pretend this never happened. David wiped his eyes and straightened his shoulders. For just a moment, I caught a glimpse of the strong, principled man I'd always hoped he could become. Goodbye, Mom. Thank you for... Thank you for everything you gave me, even though I threw it away. He turned and walked away, and this time I knew it really was goodbye. Not the angry, bitter separation of 2 years ago, but something sadder and more final. The death of a relationship that could never be repaired, no matter how much either of us might want it. I watched until he disappeared around the corner, then went back to tending my roses. They were blooming beautifully this year, just like my mother always said they would. 2 years after David's final visit, I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd survived betrayal by my own son and a con artist's scheme to steal my home, only to face a battle I couldn't outwit or outmaneuver. The good news, Dr. Patterson told me, is that we caught it early. Surgery, followed by chemotherapy and radiation, gives you an excellent prognosis. And the bad news? It's going to be a difficult few months. You'll need help with daily activities, transportation to treatments, someone to advocate for you when you're too sick to advocate for yourself. I thought about my options. David was in Alaska. Maintaining the complete separation we'd both agreed was necessary. I had no other family, no children who could step in during a crisis. But as I left the oncologist's office, I realized I wasn't alone. I had something better than family. I had chosen community. Within hours of sharing my diagnosis with the support group, my phone was ringing constantly. Margaret insisted on driving me to every appointment. Dorothy appointed herself my medical research coordinator, armed with printouts and questions for every doctor I saw. Helen organized a meal train that kept my freezer stocked for months. This is what real family looks like, Eleanor told me the night before my surgery. People who choose to love you and show up when you need them, not people who share your DNA and think that gives them the right to exploit you. The surgery went well, but chemotherapy was brutal. I lost my hair, my appetite, and temporarily, my legendary stubborn streak. There were days when I was too sick to get out of bed, too weak to answer the phone, too discouraged to believe I'd ever feel human again. But every morning, someone showed up. Margaret with coffee and crossword puzzles. Dorothy with gossip from the neighborhood. Helen with homemade soup and terrible jokes. Sarah, David's former fiancée, who'd become like a daughter to me over the past few years. You know, I told Margaret during one of my worst days, if Maya had succeeded in her plan, if she'd gotten me committed or stolen my property, I never would have built this life. I never would have found this community. Are you saying you're grateful to her? I'm saying that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads to the best thing that happens to you. Maya tried to destroy me, but instead she forced me to discover who I really was underneath all the roles I'd been playing. 6 months later, I was cancer-free and stronger than ever. The experience had clarified something I'd been thinking about since David's goodbye visit, what I wanted my legacy to be. I called James Hendricks and asked him to meet me at the house. I want to establish a foundation, I told him as we sat in my living room. Something that will continue the work I've been doing with elder abuse victims, but on a larger scale. What kind of foundation? Legal aid for elderly people facing financial abuse. Safe housing for seniors who've been exploited by family members. Education programs to help people recognize and prevent elder fraud. I want to use every penny I have to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to others. James smiled. And the house will become the headquarters for the foundation. After I'm gone, this place will continue fighting for people who need protection from their own families. Over the next year, we established the Felicia Andrews Foundation for Elder Justice. The house was placed in a trust that would maintain it as both a historical property and a working foundation headquarters. My life insurance and investments would fund operations in perpetuity. But the most important part of the foundation wasn't the money or the building. It was the network of volunteers who'd been trained by my support groups. Women like Eleanor and Patricia and Helen, who understood from personal experience what it meant to be betrayed by family and what it took to rebuild your life afterward. We're not just helping victims, I explained to a reporter doing a feature on the foundation. We're creating a new model for what family can look like. Not blood relatives who think they own you, but chosen relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. The foundation's motto, printed on all our materials, was the phrase that had become my personal mantra. Forgiveness is optional. Boundaries are not. On my 80th birthday, the foundation hosted a celebration in my honor. The house was filled with women I'd helped, volunteers who'd joined our mission, and community leaders who'd supported our work. Sarah gave a speech about chosen family. Margaret presented me with a scrapbook documenting 4 years of support group meetings. Dorothy surprised me with a donation that would fund our legal aid program for an additional 5 years. As I looked around my living room, the same room where Maya had once tried to pressure me into signing away my rights, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This house had always been about family, but now it was about the right kind of family. The kind that built you up instead of tearing you down. Speech, someone called out, and soon the whole room was chanting for me to say something. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 80 years, but also feeling the strength that comes from surviving everything life can throw at you. For years ago, I thought my story was ending. My son had betrayed me. A stranger had tried to steal my home, and I felt alone and vulnerable and forgotten. I thought the worst thing that could happen to me had happened. The room was completely quiet. But I was wrong. The worst thing that could happen was also the best thing that could happen because it forced me to discover who I really was when everything else was stripped away. It forced me to find my real family, not the people who shared my blood, but the people who shared my values. I looked around at the faces surrounding me, some young, some old, all united by their commitment to protecting the vulnerable and standing up to those who would exploit them. This house will outlive me. This foundation will outlive me. But most importantly, this idea that we don't have to accept abuse just because it comes from family, that we can create new families based on love and respect rather than obligation and guilt. This idea will outlive all of us. The applause was thunderous, but what moved me most was seeing the tears in the eyes of women who understood exactly what I meant. Women who'd been where I'd been, who'd faced the choice between family loyalty and self-preservation, who'd chosen themselves and found something better on the other side. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my garden with a glass of wine and watched the sun set over the house that had become so much more than I'd ever imagined. Maya was still in prison, serving her sentence for the crimes she'd committed against me and others. David was still in Alaska, building whatever life he could from the ashes of his poor choices. But I was here, surrounded by love and purpose and the knowledge that my pain had been transformed into something meaningful. I raised my glass to the evening sky and smiled. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even with your enemies. It's becoming someone they could never destroy, no matter how hard they tried. At 82, I thought I'd faced every challenge life could offer. I'd survived betrayal, cancer, and the long process of rebuilding my identity after losing the relationships I'd thought defined me. I'd created a foundation, mentored hundreds of women, and turned my personal trauma into a force for protecting others. Then I got the call that tested everything I thought I knew about forgiveness and redemption. It was Sarah who called, her voice carefully controlled in that way that means someone is trying not to panic you. Felicia, I got a call from a hospital in Anchorage. David's been in an accident. My first response surprised me. Not fear or sadness, but a kind of emotional numbness, like my heart had wrapped itself in protective padding. How bad? Bad. He was working on an oil rig. Equipment failure, Explosion. He's alive, but
She paused.
he's not expected to make it through the week. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, staring out at the garden where David had said goodbye 4 years earlier. Why are you telling me this? Because despite everything, he's still your son. And because he asked for you. That hit me like a physical blow. He asked for me? He's conscious, barely. The doctors say he has maybe days, possibly less. He told them he needed to see his mother. Gave them my number because he said you'd changed yours. I had changed my number, specifically to avoid calls like this. Calls that would test my resolve, that would make me question the boundaries I'd fought so hard to establish. Sarah, I can't. I won't put myself through that emotional torture again. I'm not asking you to forgive him or reconcile with him. I'm asking you to consider whether you can live with yourself if you don't say goodbye. After I hung up, I called Margaret. She came over immediately, took one look at my face, and started making tea without being asked. David's dying, I said without preamble. Margaret's hand stilled on the kettle. Oh, honey. I told her about the accident, about David's request to see me, about the impossible choice I was facing. What does your gut tell you? She asked. My gut tells me to stay as far away from this as possible. David made his choices. He has to live with the consequences, even if he's dying. And your heart?
I was quiet for a long time.
My heart is telling me that if I don't go, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I'm as hard and unforgiving as the people who hurt me. You're not hard, Felicia. You're protective. There's a difference. Is there? Because right now I honestly can't tell if refusing to see my dying son makes me strong or cruel. Margaret leaned forward, taking my hands in hers. What would you tell one of the women in your support group if she were facing this choice? I'd tell her that she doesn't owe her abuser anything, not even a deathbed reconciliation. I'd tell her that protecting herself is more important than other people's expectations about forgiveness. And would that advice change if the abuser was truly remorseful? If they were genuinely trying to make amends?
No.
Because genuine remorse doesn't require the victim's participation. If David is truly sorry, he can die with that regret. He doesn't need my absolution to find peace. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked through my house, looking at the photos of David as a child, remembering the good times before Maya, before the betrayal, before everything fell apart. I thought about the support groups I'd led, the advice I'd given, the boundaries I'd helped other women establish. I thought about the last conversation David and I had shared in my garden, about the genuine remorse I'd seen in his eyes, about the man he'd seemed to be trying to become. Most of all, I thought about legacy. What did I want my legacy to be? A woman who was so strong she never bent, never showed mercy, never risked her heart again? Or a woman who could face even the hardest choices with grace and wisdom? At 3 a.m, I called the airline. The flight to Anchorage was the longest 6 hours of my life. I sat in the narrow seat, staring out at clouds and trying to prepare myself for what I might find. Sarah had offered to come with me, but I'd refused. This was something I needed to do alone. The hospital was stark and sterile, smelling of disinfectant and despair. David was in the ICU, connected to machines that beeped and hummed with artificial life. He looked smaller than I remembered, fragile in a way that made my chest tight. He was awake when I walked in, though just barely. His eyes, still the same blue as his father's, widened when he saw me. Mom, his voice was barely a whisper. You came. I came. I pulled a chair close to his bed, but didn't touch him. Even now, even with him dying, I needed that boundary. I didn't think you would. I wasn't sure I would either. We looked at each other across the gulf of 4 years and a lifetime of hurt. He looked older than his 37 years, marked by hard work and harder living. But there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before, Peace, maybe, or at least the absence of the desperate neediness that had made him so vulnerable to Maya's manipulation. "I'm glad you're here," he said. "I need to tell you something." "David, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. Please." I nodded for him to continue. "I've been sober for 3 years, going to meetings, working the steps, trying to understand how I became someone who could hurt you the way I did." "Congratulations. One of the steps is making amends to people you've harmed. But my sponsor told me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is leave people alone, especially if seeing you would cause them more pain."
Smart sponsor.
That's why I never tried to contact you again after that day in your garden. Not because I didn't want to, but because I finally understood that my need for forgiveness wasn't more important than your need for peace. I felt something shift in my chest, a tiny crack in the armor I'd built around my heart. What changed? Why ask for me now? David was quiet for a moment, his breathing labored. "Because I'm dying, and I realized there was one thing I never said to you. Something you needed to hear." "What's that?" "You were a perfect mother. Everything that went wrong between us, everything I did to hurt you, had nothing to do with how you raised me. You gave me every tool I needed to be a good man, and I chose not to use them. That's on me, not you." The words hit me like a physical force. For 4 years, despite all my work with support groups and boundary setting, part of me had wondered if I'd somehow failed as a mother. If there was something I could have done differently that would have prevented David's betrayal. "You didn't fail me," David continued, as if reading my thoughts. "I failed you. I failed the values you taught me, the example you set, the love you gave me. But that failure was mine alone." Tears started flowing down my cheeks, and I didn't try to stop them. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," David whispered. "I'm not asking for reconciliation. I'm just asking you to know that your love wasn't wasted, even though I threw it away. You were exactly the mother I needed. I just wasn't the son you deserved." I reached out then for the first time in 4 years and took his hand. It was cold, fragile, the hand of a man whose body was giving up the fight. "David," I said softly, "I need you to know something too." "What?" "I never stopped loving you. Even when I hated what you'd done, even when I cut you out of my life, I never stopped loving the little boy you used to be. The love was real, even if the relationship couldn't survive." He squeezed my hand with what little strength he had left. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for letting me say goodbye properly. Thank you for becoming the man I always hoped you could be, even if it took losing everything to get there." We sat in silence for a while, holding hands, watching the machines that were keeping him alive. It wasn't reconciliation. Too much had been broken for that. But it was something else, something I hadn't known I needed until that moment. It was closure. Real closure. The kind that comes not from pretending the hurt never happened, but from acknowledging it fully and choosing to lay it down anyway. David died 2 days later, while I was sleeping in the hotel room I'd booked for a week, but would only need for 3 days. The nurse called at dawn to tell me he'd passed peacefully in his sleep. I made the arrangements for his cremation, signed the papers as his next of kin, and flew home with his ashes in a simple wooden box. Back in my garden, I scattered them around the roses my mother had planted so many years ago. It seemed fitting. David had always loved those roses as a child, had helped me tend them during the good years before Maya, before everything fell apart. "Rest in peace, sweetheart," I whispered to the evening air. "You're home now." 5 years have passed since David's death, and I'm now 87 years old. My hair is completely white. My hands shake sometimes when I pour tea, and I need a walker to navigate the stairs in my Victorian home. But my mind is sharp, my spirit is strong, and my sense of purpose has never been clearer. The Felicia Andrews Foundation for Elder Justice has helped over 3,000 seniors escape financial abuse. We've successfully prosecuted 47 family members for elder fraud, established safe houses in 6 states, and trained thousands of volunteers to recognize and prevent the kind of exploitation I once faced. More importantly, we've proven that chosen family can be stronger than blood family, that boundaries are not walls but bridges to healthier relationships, and that surviving betrayal doesn't make you hard, it makes you wise. This morning, I'm sitting in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Maya once tried to manipulate me into signing away my rights, preparing for what will likely be my final interview. A documentary filmmaker is coming to record my story for a project about elder abuse and family reconciliation. Mrs. Andrews, she'll probably ask, "Do you have any regrets about how you handled the situation with your son and daughter-in-law?" I've been thinking about that question for weeks, and I finally have an answer. I regret that it took a crisis to show me who I really was underneath all the roles I'd been playing. I regret that I spent so many years putting other people's needs ahead of my own that I almost forgot I had needs at all. I regret that David felt so unloved and insecure that he was vulnerable to a predator like Maya. But I don't regret fighting back. I don't regret setting boundaries. I don't regret choosing my own well-being over family loyalty. And I don't regret cutting David out of my life when he chose Maya over me. Because sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes protecting yourself is the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for the people who are hurting you. Sometimes the kindest response to betrayal is to refuse to enable it. I think about Maya sometimes, still serving her sentence in federal prison. I wonder if she ever thinks about the woman she tried to destroy, the life she tried to steal, the son she turned against his mother. I wonder if she has any regrets, or if she's simply planning her next con for when she gets out. I think about David too, but with a different kind of sadness now. Not the bitter grief of betrayal, but the softer sorrow of lost possibilities. He could have been so much more than he was. We could have had so much more together if he'd chosen differently. But I've learned that you can't love someone into making better choices. You can't sacrifice yourself into fixing them. You can't set yourself on fire to keep them warm. The doorbell rings, and I know it's the filmmaker arriving for our interview. As I make my way to the front door, using my walker but still steady on my feet, I pass the photos that line my hallway. Not pictures of David, I took those down years ago, but photos of my chosen family. Margaret and Dorothy and Helen, Sarah and the women from my support groups. The volunteers who've dedicated themselves to protecting vulnerable seniors. These are the faces of my real legacy. Not a son who betrayed me for a con artist, but hundreds of women who learned they didn't have to accept abuse just because it came wrapped in the language of love. I open the door to find a young woman with kind eyes and a digital camera. "Mrs. Andrews? I'm Jessica Chun from PBS. Thank you so much for agreeing to share your story. Come in, dear. I've made tea." As we settle in my living room, she sets up her equipment and reviews her notes. "I have to ask," she says, "after everything you've been through, what would you say to other elderly people who are facing similar situations with their families?" I think for a moment, looking around the room where so much of my story has unfolded, where Maya tried to steal my future, where David chose greed over love, where I discovered my own strength and rebuilt my life from the ground up. I tell them that forgiveness is optional, but boundaries are not. I tell them that family is about love and respect, not blood and obligation. I tell them that it's never too late to start over, to find your real people, to build a life that honors who you are instead of who others expect you to be. And if someone says you were too hard on your son, that family should forgive and forget. I smile, thinking of all the women I've helped over the years, all the lives that have been saved because someone finally said no to abuse disguised as love. I tell them that some things shouldn't be forgiven. Some betrayals are too deep, some wounds too fundamental. And that's okay. Forgiveness isn't required for healing. Boundaries are. The interview lasts 3 hours. I tell her everything: Maya's scheme, David's betrayal, the psychiatric hospital plot, the final goodbye, the foundation we built from the ashes of my broken family. I tell her about chosen family and real love and the difference between being strong and being hard. When she's finished packing up her equipment, she looks at me with something like awe. Mrs. Andrews, I have to say, you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. I'm not strong, dear. I'm just stubborn. There's a difference. What's the difference? Strong people bend without breaking. Stubborn people refuse to bend at all. Sometimes stubbornness is exactly what's needed to survive. After she leaves, I sit in my garden as the sun sets over the house I fought so hard to protect. In a few months, I'll be moving to assisted living, not because anyone is forcing me, but because I'm making that choice for myself on my own terms, while I still can. The house will become the permanent headquarters for the foundation. My bedroom will be converted into offices for the legal aid program. The kitchen where Maya tried to manipulate me will become a training center for volunteers. The living room where David chose greed over love will host support groups for other victims of family financial abuse. It's a good legacy. Better than I could have imagined when this all started 6 years ago with a rainy afternoon and a daughter-in-law with fraudulent papers. As darkness falls, I go inside and lock the door behind me. Tomorrow I'll continue the work of protecting vulnerable seniors. Tomorrow I'll mentor another group of women learning to set boundaries with toxic family members. Tomorrow I'll prove once again that survival isn't just about living through betrayal, it's about transforming that betrayal into something meaningful. But tonight, I'm just an 87-year-old woman sitting in her beautiful Victorian home, surrounded by the love of chosen family, secure in the knowledge that some battles are worth fighting and some victories are worth everything they cost. Maya tried to steal my house, but she gave me something far more valuable. She gave me the chance to discover who I really was when everything else was stripped away. And who I was, it turned out, was magnificent. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey of survival, strength, and ultimate triumph. If Felicia's story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for her journey, because every woman deserves to know that she has the power to fight back, no matter her age or circumstances. Share this story with the strong women in your life, and remember, forgiveness is optional, but boundaries are not. You are never too old to stand up for yourself, never too alone to find your chosen family, and never too broken to rebuild your life into something beautiful. Until next time, keep fighting, keep surviving, and keep proving that some women don't just endure, they conquer.